Hey, it's Tom Jordan. I want to talk today about something I was very pleased about when I brought it up. In fact, when it happened last night, how incredibly pleased I was that Bhattacharya is Donald Trump's pick to head up the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. And why was I pleased so much about somebody who's heading up the NIH? Well, because Bhattacharya, he led the charge to implement what would have been the most effective, the most efficient, protective, data-driven, scientific, and well-researched and least damaging protocols during the COVID pandemic. If only the powers to be in the globally controlled medical power structures would have listened. They did not listen to this guy right here, Bhattacharya, and we got what we got, and we're still suffering as a result of that, with no real, apologies or acknowledgement that those mistakes were pretty huge and impactful and consequential. The lockdown critics, you will remember this very well, were smeared suggesting that they favored chaos and neglect, and they favored killing people if you were opposed to the lockdowns. But it was always the exact opposite. Society does not need bureaucrats to treat us like mindless drones. From day one, people knew how to mitigate the risks. Before day one, they had planned for a coronavirus pandemic and what to do, and they threw those things out the window. You protect the vulnerable, you adapt your habits, and you use common sense. Yet public health elites insisted on police state measures that wrecked lives and businesses, all while dismissing rational solutions like focused protections. We're bringing this up today because I just read a great piece from the Brownstone Institute by Jeffrey Tucker, who's going to join me in just a moment here. Some have now borrowed this phrase, never forget, in order to prevent this from ever happening again. And while the leftists in the media demand they kind of move on from the situation, it's, let's quickly forget about those authoritarian measures. That was 4 years ago. We need to think about the future. Well, that's why we're bringing it up, because we do need to prepare as we think about the future. And I'll speak live in a few seconds with Jeffrey Tucker with the Brownstone Institute, who wrote about what Bhattacharya's pick means for the United States. Bhattacharya stands in a position to ensure that these catastrophic measures and mistakes are not repeated. That's why we're bringing it up in 2024. It wasn't that long ago that this occurred. Just not forget this. Also, just a reminder to chime in, comment, ask questions in the comment sections. I'll get to those in a moment. Love to interact with our viewers and listeners here. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live, simply subscribe, click the notification bell, watch the content, and then share it if you could. That's tremendously beneficial, helpful for us to keep us going here. Thank you so much. Listen, I remember during COVID, some of my colleagues would say things like, I will gladly stay locked down until there's not even one case left of COVID-19. I thought, really? Not one case of a coronavirus in this country. And you probably thought the same thing as well that I did, a response to that, bold and seemingly absurd claim, because you would never get there. COVID zero was the totally unrealistic goal. COVID zero was the goal. And that became the standard. And it moved quickly there from, flatten the curve to not one case of COVID. And then we can come out of our houses. And how quickly we caved as a society to authoritarian rule that had zero rhyme or reason to it. We became, I hate to say it, but we became very stupid. We lowered ourselves to the flawed premise of lockdowns, the assumption that people are incapable of rational self-governance. And we just gave it all away to the experts who are out there, who were not acting as experts, who were acting as, let's set aside the science and the data in terms of how we should approach this pandemic. And critics of them were accused of dismissing all of the control measures, which was not true. The Great Barrington Declaration came out in, I think it was October of 2020, and it advocated very targeted and focused protection over the most vulnerable. And it was a very scientific approach, data-driven approach to how we can deal with this pandemic, but it was shoved aside and considered extreme and not common sense and dangerous. So you have this overreach of public health elites, these figures like Anthony Fauci. They were seen as, dismissive of societal intelligence, opting for totalitarian measures instead, extreme proposals like universal testing and forced isolation. It was an authoritarian mindset detached from the practical realities of what we do with a pandemic. The Great Barrington Declaration, it did advocate for that focused protection, as I mentioned, while considering the economic, the social, and the psychological costs of lockdowns. And its authors were vilified, yet their stance has proven true over time. It's the vindication of J. Bhattacharya. He was once labeled a fringe epidemiologist, and now he occupies a critical role to prevent future public health overreach. And I think his rise to this position symbolizes justice and the enduring power of reasoned opposition. Let's bring in Jeffrey Tucker. I believe he's with us. The founder, the author, and president at Brownstone Institute. He's also a senior economics columnist for Epoch Times, author of 10 books, including this book called Life After Lockdown. Jeffrey, it's nice to have you back here on Tom Jordan Live. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
How is your life, in your view, after the lockdowns in America?
Well, I guess we're all kind of going through this period of decompression right now, trying to figure out what just happened to us and what the implications are. And I voraciously read, everything I possibly can on it. And I feel like I know more than most anybody else, actually. It's not quite accurate, but
I think you
close to
do.
accurate. Yeah, it's close to accurate. So I'm reading through the new House subcommittee report, final report on the COVID response. Came out just yesterday, and it's a good document, I would say, overall. It's very critical of the entire COVID response, the denial of natural immunity, the lockdowns, school closures, the plexiglass and masking, and forced vaccinations, the lack of any kind of serious attention to safety signals concerning the vaccine, um, the lies and the censorship, the copying of the CCP, World Health Organization, strategies for disease management, the wild exaggerations of the totalitarianism really of the response, and has great documentation, citations. I think maybe 2,000 footnotes. It's 500 pages, and I'm kind of going through it. And incredibly, I guess I'm left with the sense of I'm really grateful for this document because at least it's uh, an attempt to come to terms with what I think most people understand now, which is that this was a catastrophic thing for the country and for our liberties. But I still feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions in the document, and it bypasses a lot of things that should be talked about a little more honestly. But I think it's a good start. I I feel as if the process of accountability has just only begun recently.
Mm.
We've kind of put it on the back burner for years now. One of the reasons is that well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but
Well, do you think
um,
there will be accountability? Because from what I've observed is that people just want to move on. Like COVID was 4 years ago. We went through it. Let's not bring it up again. And my reaction has always been, well, listen, these were, and you wrote about this, these lockdown policies at the time. We acquiesced to them, and they were justified by the assumption that you wrote about that society would spiral into chaos. We would be out of control, and millions of people would die if we didn't give in to these authoritarian government-controlled orders. And as you mentioned just a few moments ago, these were lies that were being brought to us, but we caved to this. And I don't understand the psychology, all of it behind it. Like what manipulative tactics were used to convince the broader portion of society that this was all necessary, and if we're going to save lives, we all need to do this together and give away our freedoms in order to stay safe. You've thought about that, I'm sure, about the psychology behind that. Like why did we, as a country and as a world globally, acquiesce so easily and so readily?
part of the reason was that it was such shock and awe. We just got these orders coming from above. You can't leave your home. You can't have a house party. You can't go visit your grandmother in the nursing home. You can't go to church. You can't sing. Um, uh, you need to spray down your groceries. Uh, you know, it and none of it really made sense. But here's the thing: there was still some trust left in the system back in those days. So people just didn't believe that governments were capable of this level of lies or mistakes, really, and that was backed by a media that was 100% all in. Like you couldn't even get away from, and that goes for Fox News too. But I mean, all across the mainstream media, they were backing these claims that this was just a normal pandemic response, and so that was a little shocking. Like, even I had some trust in the national media at that point. I smelled a rat from pretty early on. It was about February 27th, 2020, when the New York Times podcast with Michael Barbaro was interviewing Donald G. McNeil, their lead virus reporter, who's since wrote a book that he was lied to about everything. Um, but they were trying to whip up a kind of population-wide panic, and I thought, that panic and public health are not; those don't really go together,
It's not
So
good. Yes, it's not
yeah,
healthy.
yeah. So I
And
knew there
it's
was
interesting
something
because
brewing.
to that point about the media involved in this, and it's one of the three reasons in 2020 when I quit legacy, if you want to call it mainstream media,
Mm.
news journalism in this country because it wasn't honest, and that was with a subsidiary of CBS News at the time. And what we were told specifically as reporters and anchors and producers that we have to not only privately support what we're being told to do with the lockdowns and the quarantines, we need to publicly support it. We need to go out and encourage our viewers, our listeners, our readers that this is what they have to do in order for all of us not to die. And so that was a command. And so it wasn't an objective view of, okay, how do we normally deal with a coronavirus on a maybe a lower powerful scale here? And what was the data driven results and how we should approach a pandemic prior to, February, March of 2020? We eschewed all of it. We got rid of all of it and we just did what we were told to do. But the media was very much involved in that, and they did stir up the panic as a result of it. And
Yeah, we
so,
weren't used to that. We weren't used to
yeah.
that. It was just one line we were getting from all of them at the same time, so that we couldn't understand why that would be true. And then you had a very tremendous failure of on the part of the intellectuals. By whom I mean the academia, our political pundit class, the mainline publications that we read from the New Yorker and the Atlantic, and for that matter, National Review, or whatever you were reading. No matter what you read, you heard the same thing. You need to lock down. You need to be scared. You need to prepare yourself for the shots. And the academics just fell into silence. They had nothing to say about it. And we started hearing things like, well, wait a minute, these PCR tests are not accurate. The virus is not actually deadly for most of the population. The only people who are really facing uh, severe medically significant consequences from infection were the aged and infirm. Like we started understanding this, but it was not nobody was being told that. And then when they started denying natural immunity, it's just so many things were happening. And I remember those days and saying to people, look, the PCR tests are not correct. They're exaggerating the death rate by classifying people as COVID dead when they died of other things, like even a motorcycle accident or whatever.
Right.
The most of the deaths are people age 80 and unhealthy. And there is such thing as natural immunity. This does seem like a severe flu, based on everything we can tell. Why is nobody saying this? And you had to kind of become a bit of a like what something that none of us really want to become, which is a sort of a conspiracy theorist, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you had
Right.
you had to I mean, once you see all this, you had to imagine that maybe uh, everybody's lying. Maybe the government's lying, maybe media's lying, maybe academia's lying, all the publications are bought off. Like it's something, oh, because the pharmaceutical industries are the main advertisers for all the media companies, and they are behind the medical journals, which are also lying. So, you develop this kind of like the story I was telling that I had been more or less convinced of, but trying to convince other people of, was so elaborate. It presumed a kind of a level of malevolence
Mm,
baked into all of our institutions, including, and then don't forget, big tech was censoring you, right? So you couldn't say these things on
yes.
Facebook or Twitter. Google search engines were excluding articles that had a contrary voice. So you put it all together, and I had several friends of mine who were early on COVID dissidents who fell away after about the first 4 months because they said, "Look, I'm tired of thinking such dark thoughts about all of our institutions. I don't believe that all of academia, all of media, all of big tech, and all of government and all of the medical industry is lying. Like, I just don't believe that. Like, how could that?"
It was hard to take in, and you
Yeah,
brought up all the institutions that were involved in this, and
yeah,
there's academia, of course, which is very concerning. There was the media that was out there. There's the government, but also you mentioned the medical establishment. We're talking about
yeah.
hospitals, and I started to really believe that there was a conspiracy underfoot because the physicians who were greatly respected that I knew were dear friends of mine, when they told me what they were ordered to do and not to do, or their license will be stripped if they dare criticize any of these lockdowns, or they opt for another treatment that they know has worked in the past, but they're now not allowed to do that to save someone's life and just let the patient die there on the table. And you can't give somebody a life-saving kidney or liver transplant because they haven't had the vaccine, so they're going to die in any case. I mean, all these crazy decisions by the medical establishment, all of these things led to a growing distrust in all of these
Oh,
institutions.
that's it. You described it perfectly, Tom. The amount of incredulity that we were introduced to over the course of 3 years was very difficult. And even though I was opposed to the response, I was writing against lockdowns as early as January 2020. I was like, I know these plans are out there. I know that they've been trying to do it for a lot of years now, but this is a very bad idea. So, but I wasn't, and I had already published my first book by October 2020 on the topic, and I was considered a leading COVID dissident, but I wasn't anywhere near understanding the depths of the duplicity and malevolence here. So when I finally got COVID, I'd not been trying to avoid COVID for sure, but I finally got it in January of 21, and I called up a doctor and he prescribed for me, uh, among other things, ivermectin. So I went across. So I said to him on the phone, I said, "Well, great. I'll just, if you'll just send the prescription over to the CVS down the street, that'd be great." And he responded to me, he said, "You can't get ivermectin at CVS. They're part of the system. They're part of the problem. They're entirely
Yes.
corrupt." And I remember just being on the phone with him, like, "What are you What are you talking about? They're part of the system. What system? I mean, how
Mm,
could how can a nice
yeah.
store down the street be part of anybody's system? That
Right.
doesn't make
Nice
any sense."
pharmacist was he talks to me all the time. You're saying
Yeah,
he's part of the system. Well, actually, maybe not him, but the people that employ him are. And the same thing
and
happened to me. I had a doctor, actually, my initial doctor refused to treat me at all. He says, I can do nothing for you. And I had COVID in February 2021. And it was bad. It was not fun. It was not enjoyable. My doctor said, don't do anything, stay put. If it gets too bad, call an ambulance and go to the hospital, which I knew if I did that, I'd probably die because so I reached out to another doctor and he said, oh, no, 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 no. Here's how we're going to treat you. And they gave me different protocol, different medicines, and I was lickety split back. And I thought, well, how come? Why aren't we allowing patients to be treated? And I look all the way to like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the man who identifies himself with science, and he was very critical of lockdown. Anybody who was critical of the lockdowns, or anybody who was critical of the treatment protocols that were in existence, and he called them reckless and dangerous and ignorant, and framing himself and people like him themselves as the sole arbiters of truth, even pushing back against epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists and virologists and all these these expertise, people with this kind of expertise. So, what does this reveal, do you think, about the dangers of centralizing power to this
yeah,
degree? And
Well,
that's to me where it seems to come. We could say it came from the NIH or the CDC, but
yeah,
even more than that, it was a global centralization of
yeah,
medical decision to the World Health Organization.
yeah,
How dangerous
yeah.
is this?
Yeah, global in scope, with only like two or three nations in the entire planet Earth dissenting in part, right?
Right.
And it was ubiquitous in the sense that it was corrupting of governments, but also big tech and media and academia, and all the way down to your local pharmacy. But the doctor who gave me my prescription for ivermectin. He said, "Well, you can't get it at Walgreens or CVS. They will not give it to you. So give me a family-owned pharmacy near you." And I said, "Okay." There is one, actually, one across the street I'd never used before. It's old family-owned pharmacy, had been around for a century. So I took my prescription over there, and I'll never forget it. The lady looked at it, and her jaw dropped, and she saw ivermectin. She whispered um, into the ear of the proprietor, and he shook his head like this.
You're kidding.
Yeah,
We're not going to
and
give him ivermectin.
and yeah, and so she gave it back to me and said, "I'm sorry, we can't give that to you." And I thought, wow, he was right. So it turns out I did have a friend in New York City who had some ivermectin that she had ordered from India, or maybe a friend of hers ordered from India. I'm not sure, and FedExed it to me in the mail.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it was the
Hmm.
only way I was able to get the thing, and I took it, and 3 hours later I felt better than I had felt in like 3 weeks. So it was, and you have to, ivermectin's interesting. You have to kind of keep taking it, but I considered that ivermectin kind of cured me,
Yeah,
of
well,
COVID or
it's very
whatever.
effective. It's very
Yeah,
effective. It was a lie that it didn't work, and they called it a
yeah.
horse dewormer and all these things. I know it's been used on human beings for decades, very
Yeah,
effectively. I think millions of American or people have taken ivermectin very safely.
yeah.
So
And
that was
then
just
and
another
then we
lie.
did, and then the censorship, and I had assumed that I was one of the few dissidents in the world, and even after the Great Barrington Declaration, it was somehow busted through the censors, but I wasn't sure I understood the extent of it or why it kept happening. But gradually over time, throughout 2021, I began to realize, oh, so many of the tech platforms and media platforms are all captured, like specifically captured by interest groups associated with the administrative state. And then that was later confirmed once Elon Musk took over Twitter. He said, "Look, we had FBI employees all over the place here. I mean, a lot of the employees here were doing nothing but censoring people." And he said one comment at some point. He said, "Whatever your conspiracy theory is, it's true,
Hmm.
and probably several more you've not even thought about."
Hmm.
And and since that time, I found out, that so many of our institutions have been compromised. From the think tanks to the universities, publications, one after another. And now I've kind of gotten good at recognizing those. But it's been a very difficult process, and nobody wants to just lose trust, kind of in everything. You know?
Well, hopefully we'll restore it because yeah, even things we already all understood as a society, like natural immunity.
Yeah.
Dr. Fauci and others say, well, no, we don't think natural immunity works this time around for some unknown reason. Turns out it very much does. So now, restoring trust. Jay Bhattacharya, now the Donald Trump pick to head up the National Institutes of Health. That's a
Yeah.
huge position. Obviously, they're huge. It's a huge research facility, and a lot of decisions come down from there. Bhattacharya, he was labeled a fringe epidemiologist for opposing the lockdowns and being one of the authors, along with he's from Stanford. You have another professor from was it Oxford? You have another one from Harvard coming together to come up with the Great Barrington Declaration. Now he has risen to this position of great influence at the National Institutes of Health. What is the vindication in the sense of Jay Bhattacharya? What does that speak to in terms of the importance of standing firm if you know something to be true based on a strong, truthful premise of logic and sound reason and common sense? How important it is to not back down from at least believing, but more importantly, maybe speaking out based on those truths.
It's a tremendous poetic justice associated with that because his work was censored. He was called all sorts of names. A takedown of the Great Brownstone Declaration was ordered from the very top, and they pushed all the buttons that they have, from uh, Rolling Stone and Mother Jones, and back in those days, BuzzFeed, and so on. So, and for him to come roaring back and within this high prestige position is very satisfying. But my worry is what happens now, because uh, he's going to he's going to waltz into this place and get the fanciest office with the fanciest parking place and be able to hire a couple dozen people around him or whatever. But the budget of that place is, I don't know, it's close to $50 billion at this point,
Wow.
and tens of thousands of employees. They have all the institutional knowledge. He's just going to be sitting at a desk, checking his emails like he does normally. And what exactly are his powers? He doesn't have the ability to fire anybody. Um,
Hmm.
a job with the civil service is the most secure job in basically on the planet Earth, the U.S. Civil Service. You cannot be fired without, grave cause, which means gross incompetence, meaning you don't show up for like 3 years and somebody happens to notice, like that. I mean, it's got to be something just terrible. Dealing drugs on the premises or something. I don't know what it would take to get fired at the
Right.
federal. So otherwise, you can't fire anybody. They have all the institutional knowledge. They don't even show up to work anymore.
Yes.
All come
Right.
back since COVID. So he's going to be kind of rattling around in this gigantic building in Washington D.C. By himself at a desk, surrounded by his handful of friends. Do they even know where to begin with this? I don't know. Is he going to be able to accomplish his goals? I don't know. I mean, it's a major problem. Look, it's enough struggle in the private sector when you become the new CEO of Frito Lay or whatever the thing is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You pretty much, and everybody knows this, that your first job is you have to get rid of all the top tier management and the mid level managers, like entirely, like what Elon did when he went to Twitter. He fired over the course of like 2 weeks, something like four
Mm-hmm.
out of five employees. Okay, and then he was able to turn the company around. But even among those that were left, there's been huge turnover among the remaining few. Well, that is not possible in a government agency. So I think in order for Jay to be successful at NIH, we need other reforms too. We need more fundamental reforms of the civil service itself. We should not have a system of permanent employment in government jobs for anyone under any circumstances. Between 1789 and 1883, we had constant, turnover in government positions with every new administration. That's the way it should be.
Yeah,
But
that was good.
we started the civil service, and that all changed. And it's, through wars and depression and so on. Now we have this permanent class of rulers, and they just are just going to wait it out. I think my worry is that the civil service is going to treat Jay and a lot of the new appointees similar to the way the Taliban treated the U.S. Army after the Afghanistan invasion under George W. Bush. They just when they marched into Kabul, there was nobody there, and they assumed that meant that they won. Well, they just went out to the hills and started, guerrilla warfare, and came back. 20 years later, they're in power again. Okay,
Mm,
so I'm
right.
afraid that that's what the civil service is going to be doing. But it's even worse in a sense that, like I say, they don't even show up to work. There's about 5% of federal employees who actually go to the office anymore.
That's just remarkable. Yet they still own all these buildings. We're spending billions
Yeah.
and billions of dollars on buildings that are not being used. And I'm so glad you brought this up in your piece at the Brownstone Institute when you wrote about this last week, because you're right. We assumed, like, and I think that was a great analogy in terms of George W. Bush. Hey, they're not in Kabul anymore. They're gone. We won. Let's plant the flag. Let's fly that airplane on that aircraft carrier and claim victory, when they were, as you said, just up in the hills. And I think you're right, because it's funny, because Jamie Raskin, the member of Congress from Maryland, he came out, I think it was yesterday, and said, There is this, conspiratorial depiction or description of something called the deep state. Nobody knows what the deep state is. It's just a word. Well, you just accurately described what the deep state is. Probably tens of thousands of employees that cannot be fired, who are entrenched in our government bureaucracies, that are really the ones who are making the decisions for us, not our elected leaders. They've been put there for life, essentially. That's the deep state, and it's in every institution in this government. And as great it is that Jay Bhattacharya is now heading that institution, the NIH, what do you do with the tens of thousands of people that are there? We have a comment. Somebody wants to ask you, Jeffrey Tucker, if you question, if you would be okay taking that. It's from Harold. Good to see you back here, Harold. Harold Sekelian says, "Hi, Tom. Please ask Mr. T what he thinks accountability would look like." Thanks, Harry. What would be, do you think, Mr. Tucker, a proper measure of accountability for those who implemented the COVID pandemic strategies and lockdowns of 2020 into 2021 and 2022?
Well, we've had several years of people fantasizing about Nuremberg 2.0 and all this kind of stuff. I don't, I like to keep my expectations realistic, and what I'd like to see is, and by the way, we're talking about 430 different government agencies, okay?
Wow.
And something like on the level of 2.5 million permanent staffers.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
this is a major problem, and Trump toyed around with the idea of Schedule F, which is to reclassify a lot of these public sector civil servants as at will employment under narrow conditions, but that the best estimates are that would apply to like 50,000. We need something much more fundamental. So I'd like to see a thorough house cleaning of all the agencies, as just a start, and let them get jobs somewhere else. I think that would help with accountability, because you're never going to get anybody to admit they were wrong. So there's that. So just
I've noticed that.
is a start, and then I think we need to get rid of pharmaceutical advertising on television. I think that would help clean up the media immediately, and then stop indemnifying the vaccine companies against harm. You in a free market, when you make a product and that's faulty and causes harm, then you should bear some liability for it, and your insurance costs should reflect the risk of that. And that's just the way the market works. But vaccine companies don't have this, which is why so many people who are injured by these shots, they have no recourse. They're just sitting at home suffering, and they have no mechanisms that are in place to compensate them for anything. They can get attorneys, and but there's nothing in place. So we need to repeal that 1986 indemnification of pharmaceutical companies, and then go back to, I think it's 1982, the Bayh-Dole Act, which allowed NIH to share royalties with vaccine companies so that they can, invent products, and everybody gets rich together. We need to get rid of that too. So I think those three reforms, I think I just mentioned four reforms, would be revolutionary. I mean,
That's remarkable to me. If they can do that, I know Elon Musk cleaned out most of Twitter in 2 weeks. I don't know if 4 years is long enough for including Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy with Doge and now Jay Bhattacharya and Donald Trump at the helm. If they can clean that out as much as we would like them to do,
but the plan is to issue executive orders that would reclassify many people in the civil service, and that's a good step. The problem is that an executive order will immediately be challenged by the D.C. courts, federal courts in D.C., and because those courts are entirely inhabited by partisans of tyranny, basically, they'll be enjoined instantly, and then go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to have to decide whether to uphold the injunctions or not. So that, and they very well may uphold those injunctions, right? We just don't know. So what really needs to happen is that the Trump administration, and I know they're in the process of thinking through this and doing this right now, is that they have to convert these executive orders into legislation.
Yes.
And that legislation has to pass the House and the Senate and be signed by the president. That for fundamental reform of the civil service, I can think of no other greater priority. Now, we've got a lot of people that are elected as Republicans that are not going to want to support this. And so it's going to be up to the voters to apply the kind of pressure on them to support this reform. And just keep in mind, we have to have this reform in order to get back our democracy. So long as the administrative state is in charge, we don't have government by and for the people. We have government by government for government. And that is not the system the founders set up. That's not a country I want to live in. We tried a pretty incredible experiment in this country with having the people in charge of the government, okay? And that was different from that was different from all the Commonwealth countries that we didn't want a king. We just said we're going to trust the people. Well, that works as long as the people are really in charge. But they cannot be charged so long as you have 2.5 million permanently ensconced employees running 430 some odd agencies that and nobody can keep up with them. Many of whom are spin-offs from intelligence agencies. So all the things
Yeah.
they do are classified, including their budgets.
Yeah.
This
See, that's got to be
not
dealt with as well.
got to
And
be
and I
dealt with.
think guys like Cash Patel and these others are hopefully they're going to lift these which should be public documents out of the dark abyss of intelligence and classified materials, so they can't hide any longer on this. I want to just ask you this question. You've given me a ton of time, and I appreciate it. You're a fascinating author and a writer and a speaker. What you do there at the Brownstone Institute is incredibly important. I'm grateful that you founded that as well. But I want to talk about this whole utopian dream that a lot of people have, because I mentioned at the top of the show, and you mentioned in your piece as well, that there was this whole idea of zero COVID, this utopian idea that we have to, no matter what it takes, eliminate COVID altogether. And I couldn't tell you how many journalists I worked with were telling me the same thing, that until there's no more, not one single case of COVID, I will support the lockdowns. And I thought, well, that's never going to happen, because this is just like a coronavirus. You can't eliminate the cold, which is another type of coronavirus. You can't do that with this either. So this idea that there is this great utopian state somewhere out there, that if we just all agree together to do exactly what we were told for an unlimited duration of time, we will reach that utopian state, which will never come, right? So is that, do you think that mindset was part of what drove COVID? And does that mindset still exist? Call it communists or socialists. What do you want to say? The utopian mindset one day will reach this if we're all told to do something together and we all obey what we're told. How prevalent do you think that mindset is in this country?
It's it's a belief that stems from a sort of an engineering style mind, the belief that human biology can be managed like a machine. And the shots were supposed to get us there to zero COVID. So we had to look. There's a lot of unanswered questions about this, including in this new subcommittee report, which I'm just devouring. But they don't really answer the question: why did they do this to us? And I think the idea was that we would lock down and minimize infections as low as possible, even make them go away in anticipation of the shots, which were military countermeasures. And then the shots would inoculate us against this disease forever. Now, the whole thing is crazy because we knew going into this, at least I knew, everybody with a brain knew, everybody who paid attention in ninth grade biology class, that you cannot vaccinate, you cannot stop the trajectory, even change the trajectory of a widespread, fast mutating respiratory virus with a zoonotic reservoir. I mean, it's just not possible. And that is a virus against which you cannot vaccinate, because you cannot come up with a vaccine that moves faster than the mutations themselves. And then if you attempt to do that, it's going to create the mechanism that's going to drive more mutations and then rewire the immune system to be vulnerable to other things that's going to make you sicker than ever. So all these things we knew going into this. So it's a genuine question. Like if I knew this, and I found this out. I took a refresher course in the early days of COVID on virology by reading a first year medical textbook and this kind of stuff. So it's not exactly lost knowledge. So why did we do this? And the only answer I can really come up with is that they wanted to experiment with this new mRNA platform, which is a kind of very lucrative platform for rewiring the human immune system. And that's extremely creepy. It didn't work, and it's very damaging. The spike protein that the shot contained does not stay in the arm,
No.
thanks to the nanoparticles that go throughout the entire body and infects everything. It's very dangerous
And does more
technology.
damage.
Yeah, so I'm hoping we can get mRNA just absolutely banned, really, or at least unapproved. That's got to be something. But I agree with you. I worry about these people that believed in zero COVID. Just the other day, I was looking through, some of the archives of the papers. There was a piece that appeared in Frontiers of Health. It was called "The One Day Plan for Eliminating COVID from the World." And the idea is that you choose one day, and everybody gets tested for COVID on that day, and that all positive tests would have to isolate, and all negative tests were free to go about their business, and that they would, be basically branded with a kind of a stamp on them, and excluded from all public life, and that we would police, all the parks,
Yeah.
all the restaurants, all the theaters, and and then um, and then vaccinate, when the vaccine came along, everybody. But the theory that was published in an academic journal was that we could eliminate COVID in one day by doing this. You know, and and I know the guy who wrote this. He's not an idiot, but he's crazy. You know,
Yeah. It's
and but
insane.
a lot of my friends thought this. I mean, I know an economist who is employed at an Ivy League university, who posted on Twitter that he could get rid of COVID in one day by making all the positive cases and isolate, and that would cause the R naught to fall below one, and eventually fall to zero, and we could eliminate COVID that way. It's so
Yeah.
scary, and what's worrisome about these wild fantasies is that have they they exhibit zero regard for a basic idea like human freedom. It's just not even part of the scheme to imagine that
Well,
people
the
should
freedom
right.
was vilified itself. They came up with
Yeah,
the term, as you pointed out, freedom, DUMB. Like
yeah,
that's dumb to expect freedom, and it's selfish of you to expect that you should have your, rights of freedom and individual liberties. Because if you do, you can kill other people. And we bought into all of this, and the utopian mindset. To me, this is what really one of the big lessons for me is because we were told that there are various steps to utopia, and in one step, the utopian element was going to be in 15 days we will flatten the curve, and that didn't work. So in 30 days we'll flatten the curve, and then okay, now we got to do until we get this utopian vaccine that's going to eliminate COVID altogether. And the vaccine comes and it doesn't quite do that. Well, everyone has to take it now, and then that'll prevent the spread of COVID. That was another utopian dream that fell by the wayside because that was also false. There's no utopia out there. The reality is that the research, the data has already been there for many, many years when it comes to how you treat a pandemic with a virus such as a coronavirus. And you learned it very on. I did not read a first year medical journal during that, but me as a layperson, I read enough to understand, oh, they're doing this all wrong. Why they're doing it, that's, still being speculated as to
I
why
agree. It's
they implement this.
still speculating as to why. But what the thing that strikes me so much that I almost cannot believe that this actually happened. Um, the there was so much put on the workability of the shot, like everything was invested in that, to the point that if the shot didn't work, and it didn't, think about all the institutions that would have lost credibility: government, media, big tech, medicine, advertising, all the commanding heights of the whole of civilization in all countries would come crumbling down. And that's exactly what has happened. And it's astonishing to think that I don't know who ultimately was in charge of this pandemic response, or who came up with the cockamamie theory that we should bank the credibility of the whole of the civilized world on the workability of this experimental shot that nobody had ever tried before, and that we're going to try this experiment with billions of people.
Hmm.
I don't know who that was. I don't think it was Fauci. It certainly wasn't Redfield. It wasn't. I don't know
No.
who it was. I don't know. I don't know
I have
what it
my own
was and who it
theories
was.
about it, but again, they're just theories. I think you can look globally, you can look at the World Economic Forum, you can look at the World
Yep.
Health Organization and dig into what build back better really means and maybe come to a conclusion that way. I'm talking to my listeners right now and my viewers, but yeah, it's all speculation at this point. I would recommend people read what you've been writing about this and a whole slew of other topics at the Brownstone Institute and the website. A lot of this material is there. People can support Brownstone Institute as well. What is the website that people can go to?
Brownstone.org, and today is Giving Tuesday. We're doing a big push for fundraising since most,
I
everything we do is about the mission, and we support a lot of canceled intellectuals, journalists, and writers, giving them a bridge to a kind of a different life. And the extent to which we're allowed to do our work is entirely really comes down to voluntary donations. So I'm not shy. I don't get a salary from Brownstone, so it's not about me. I'm a
yeah.
volunteer, and I believe in our mission. I believe in what we're doing, and I see the fruits of our work. We've still got a very long way to go, but I'm feeling pretty encouraged these days. Obviously,
Yeah, wonderful. You made a lot of headway. You've enlightened my mind quite a bit as I've read your material over the past few years. Can't thank you enough. Jeffrey Tucker is the founder of Brownstone Institute and also the president of that great organization. Jeffrey Tucker, so nice to talk to you again. Thank you so much for the amount of time you gave me today. Thank you.
it's a pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Take care. Keep up the good work. It's really amazing what they're writing about over there. But this is true. This whole idea of it's not necessarily for me, it's not about litigating or even relitigating or re-arguing all the things that happened back then. It's about preventing this from ever happening again. We've never seen this kind of a measure globally. We've seen it in different countries, but this was an orchestrated event, and the global entities were all involved in this. And not only were it seemed to be a conspiracy, but they were a total failure. The lockdowns were a failure in many respects, but also just of trust in society. The whole strategy was based on the assumption that people are just incapable of managing their own risks, or when they're sick, they can't do it. So my brother lived, or still does, lives in Australia and in the state of Victoria, which was probably the most severe lockdown and quarantine area in the world. Maybe on par with China, maybe on par with New Zealand, but I think it was even worse. And people would, the police would show up at your house, and if they have a database on you, and if they found out that you knew somebody who tested positive for COVID, they would also come to your house and take you out and quarantine you in a public building, a government building somewhere else. And it was total unilateral control of your life. So the Great Barrington Declaration came out in October of 2020. It was grossly misrepresented. And I loved it when it came out. I thought, okay, this is totally common sense. This will work. Is it too late? Maybe not, but they shoved it aside as fast as they possibly could. So one of the authors, Bhattacharya, he's now going to head up the National Institutes of Health. And if Jeffrey Tucker is correct, and I think he is, he's got a lot of work cut out for him to transform that institution because there are tens of thousands of employees there who are entrenched in the NIH. He's going to have himself, and maybe he said maybe a dozen people that he can pick to work around him. But it's going to take a really concerted effort. You got to get rid of those people in charge, the managers, middle managers, and there might be a lot of layoffs included. And I think he's going to have help with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy as they try to find a way to make this government run more efficiency with a new office, DOGE, Doge, and whatnot. But the bottom line here, it was tyranny that we had seen throughout our societal systems around the world. Never thought we would see it here in the United States, but we did. And a strong pushback from the likes of news outlets like MSNBC, who said Americans are selfish because they are demanding their own individual freedoms. I'll never forget when I heard that. And I reported on that back in 2020, but I was one of the few, I'm not boasting, I was just one of the few that was, I don't know, seeing what was so obvious, I thought would be so obvious to everybody else, that was wrong and irrational. I think a lot of people did see it, but there was a lot of intimidation as well and threats. You can lose your job if you say anything else, or if you don't take the shot, you're going to be fired by order of the President of the United States, and we believe in what he says. So it's very important to keep this dialogue going in order to prevent this from happening again, whatever the excuse is next time, whether it's medical, health, or something entirely different. In this country, anyway, the United States, individual liberties and freedom is perceived, and I think rightfully so, to be a God-given right, not a government-given right. It's a God-given right. So it's one other reason I'm grateful to live in this great country. All right, we have some headlines here I want to get to. I want to talk about Devon Archer here. Devon Archer, as you know, was a business partner of, that's Devon Archer right there, business partner of Hunter Biden. He came out yesterday, I believe, is when he came out and spoke about, his former partnership with Hunter Biden there. And this is on the heels of Hunter Biden being pardoned, not just for the tax crimes he committed, and not just for the crimes or the gun crimes that he lied on about his drug abuse in order to get a gun. Not just that, but the fact that he's now pardoned for any crime he may have committed that we're not yet aware of over the past 10 years is pretty obscene in my view. So President Biden, as you know, has officially pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, covering a decade of potential offenses during his time on, Burisma's board, other foreign business deals. And that announcement made, late Sunday has Republicans and a lot of critics in the Democratic Party as well blasting the move as blatant political favoritism, shielding Hunter from scrutiny just as investigations into his dealings, some with America's enemies, are heating up. Those investigations are. So Devon Archer there, he comes out. Sorry, I'm losing my earpiece here. He comes out and did an interview yesterday, and he weighed in on this whole thing. Not on the pardon really itself, but more so on the state of the Department of Justice. Devon Archer, he testified before Congress last year about Joe Biden's role in Hunter's business ventures. He called for the DOJ to be restored as an impartial institution, free from political agendas. And his testimony highlighted how Hunter used his father's influence. He knew it. He was right there with him. Hunter Biden used Joe Biden's influence to prop up Burisma in Ukraine, amongst a slew of other companies in other countries like China and Uzbekistan and Russia and elsewhere. And it directly contradicted Joe Biden's past claims of ignorance about his son's business dealings. So this is evidence that's come out in the past. The media at large ignored it. Democrats at large as well are spinning this pardon as an act of compassion for a son battling personal struggles. And I get that. I mean, I do have compassion for Hunter Biden. I feel bad for Hunter Biden, actually, in the struggles that he went through and whatever issues he has growing up in that family that led to his addiction and whatever it was that led to that and his grief and whatnot. But he did commit crimes, and it wasn't just him. It seems to have involved the entire Biden family, including Joe, and Joe was the kingmaker essentially here because he's the guy that had all the levers. He was the guy in power who can make these deals happen. So that's why it's important. So critics are arguing this totally undermines the rule of law and reeks of a double standard. It does. This is just not just about Hunter Biden. It's about a justice system that, in the eyes of many, seems increasingly rigged in favor of the politically powerful. I want to talk about something that's happening in the state of Michigan. It's coming back again. It's something called these film incentives. Michigan State House, the Senate and the House, there's a new proposal moving through, is raising some eyebrows there. Lawmakers are considering voting. I think it's today. The vote's going to happen on this Tuesday. A pair of bills that could funnel more than $2 billion in taxpayer money to Hollywood through film industry subsidies. Yeah, you heard that right. $2 billion to lure movie productions to the state of Michigan, all on your dime if you live in the state. So the bills are backed by a Republican and a Democrat, and it aims to revive Michigan's infamous film tax credits. Critics say the original program was a total flop. Remember those Detroit ruined porn backdrops and Transformers? They didn't just fail to bring lasting economic benefits like it was promised. These movies coming here didn't turn the city around. They turned Michigan into a budgetary punching bag, essentially. Studies show these credits, they don't deliver, with some states earning back just 15 cents for every taxpayer dollar that is spent. 15 cents of the dollar is the ROI. But even more concerning than that the plan gives enormous discretion to the Michigan Film and Digital Media Office to decide who gets what. That can mean huge payouts for Hollywood elites while Michigan families foot the bill. That's a huge, huge giveaway. They've already given out all sorts of subsidies elsewhere as well. And finally, I want to talk about this, Donald Trump and Hamas. So President-elect Donald Trump, he vowed there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East if Hamas does not release his hostages before he takes office on January 20th. You see it right there. That's the statement. He wants the hostages released before he takes office. So that seems selfless to me. Obviously, Joe Biden would take credit for that because he was in office when the hostages were released. But Donald Trump doesn't care. He wants these people out, and he wants them safe. And his warning follows the release of a harrowing video showing Eden Alexander, this 20-year-old Israeli American, pleading for freedom after more than 420 days in captivity. And Donald Trump criticized the Biden administration for what he called a total lack of decisive action. And he emphasized that the Iran-backed terror group, Hamas, continues to hold at least 7 Americans hostage since their brutal attack on Israel more than a year ago. So Donald Trump's message, who was posted on Truth Social, described the kidnappings as inhumane atrocities and warned that those responsible will face the harshest retribution in U.S. history. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking to the victim's family, Alexander's family, reaffirmed his commitment to bringing the hostages home, even as violence persists big time there in the region. The tensions are very high there. And it's not just Hamas. It's Hezbollah accused of violating a ceasefire in northern Israel, right there near the Lebanon border. It's a fragile state of peace in that region that needs to be dealt with effectively. And for Donald Trump, that marks the first major foreign policy battle of his upcoming presidency. And he's signaling, he's setting out a signal. Listen, he's going to be more aggressive. He's going to take a very aggressive stance on terrorism there in the Middle East. All right, that's the headlines there. That's the post there on Truth Social from Donald Trump itself. All right, do we have any comments here? And I'm asking Karen. Let's bring them up. Let's bring up one at a time. Let's start off with, who do we have here first? Cameron Harris surprises me every time. Richard Norton, health regulation needs to be decentralized. That's right, Richard. Imagine millions of health institutions being able to try different solutions. COVID would have been solved a lot sooner. You're absolutely right about this, Richard. It did not need to stretch on as long as it did. Even if it did, we could have prevented the long-lasting, I think, decades-long damage that was incurred as a result of those lockdowns. Richard, thank you so much for your comment. Let's bring up another here. Jim Chikowski is back. Hey, Jim. What was very disturbing was that you couldn't get hydroxychloroquine prescribed under penalty of pharmacies losing their license. A very cheap drug that could have helped many. Never forget this. You're right. So hydroxychloroquine is totally safe. It was fine. It was used on different things prior to this. And I'll never forget, I was watching Fox News, and Neil Cavuto was on, and they were covering Donald Trump. And in that press conference, when he was speaking, Donald Trump said, yeah, I took hydroxychloroquine. And as soon as he said that, Neil Cavuto cut off the live stream and says, what he just did is outrageous. It is dangerous. If you take hydroxychloroquine, it will kill you. That's what Neil Cavuto said. So he cut off the feed. It was totally false. And the media allowed this just total wrong, false narrative about hydroxychloroquine, which is very, very safe. And, people in the state, even Democrats who are about to die, there was one in the state of Michigan. I won't mention her name now because she's had enough of, I think, with the press right now. But she was about to die, and the only thing left was hydroxychloroquine, and she demanded that they at least give it to her. And she took it, and it worked. Like immediately, she started getting better, and she was out in the hospital, I think, in a day or two. And because of that, and she thanked Donald Trump publicly, the Democratic Party of Michigan censored her for doing that. Saved her life. Who cares if she gets censored at that point? How dare they do that because she thanked Donald Trump for promoting hydroxychloroquine? I don't know a lot about the drug, but I know it's not the danger that they were all making it out to be. So you're right. Thank you for that. Appreciate that comment. Let's bring up another here. It's Taz. Taz is back. The debacle of COVID policies is testimony to why bureaucracies are unconstitutional. They are. CDC, FDA, etc. We took orders from corrupt bureaucracies, individuals who will never face accountability. You're absolutely right about that, Taz. We have a lot of people in control who should not be in control of our lives. And who knows what the kickbacks are. But remember, the pharmaceutical companies, they're big donors to the various campaigns out there. And I think they also share some, I won't say this because I know it's true, but I do believe that the NIH gets some sort of royalties from various patents that go out that lead to these vaccines and these various treatments. So there's something else that needs to be looked into. Man, it's money is a root of all kinds of evil, isn't it? All right, let's bring up another comment here. Thank you for yours. Arlene Pearson, such an important conversation that needs to be heard by all those who believed and possibly still support the censorship and attacks on those who question the shutdowns and supported alternate treatments other than the mRNA, emergency use vaccine, she puts in quotes, for COVID-19. Arlene, it's always good to hear it for you, and you're so right. This isn't technically, I don't think, a vaccine. It was a shot, and it was very experimental, and it was being tested on. And I think it is creepy, as Jeffrey Tucker said, that I think millions or billions of people were used as guinea pigs. I'm paraphrasing him now, to see if the mRNA vaccine would work. And we were used as guinea pigs based on lies that were being told to us that they already know it works. It is a safe vaccine. It's already been tested. You will not be injured from it. Anybody tells you will be injured is a liar. They are the ones who are dangerous. Well, it turns out there's been so many injuries that are now being buried as a result. Arlene, thank you so much. Good to hear from you. Let's bring up another. R. Paulus. Hi, R. Paulus. Good to have you. Leftists have introduced government of deceit by deceit, which they would never have accepted if the right had done it. You're right about that. Correct. They'd had burned the country to the ground if that had happened. That is absolutely true. And I'll just cite one example of it. When Donald Trump recommended the vaccine, Kamala Harris and the Democrats say, I would never take that vaccine, never, because Donald Trump recommended it, and he's the one that's developing it. As soon as he was out of office, they took the vaccine that he developed under warp speed and said, everyone has to take this. And if they don't, they're a MAGA Trumper who doesn't understand science. I mean, so these were the lies that were so easy to disprove that were right in front of us, but most people just took it as science and as gospel. So thank you so much for your comments, and thanks for watching today. I really wanted to bring this up because I think it's important that we do not forget what they did in 2020 and years beyond as an excuse to lock everybody down globally, by the way. It's a global effort that the United States partook in. Thanks for your time. Remember, you can always catch it and share this podcast, Tom Jordan Live, on YouTube, X, Facebook, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thanks you so much. God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow.